No one ever noticed the bruises on Mara Vale's wrists because no one ever really noticed Mara. She moved through the estate like a shadow, quiet, efficient, invisible by design. A maid learned early that invisibility was survival. Eyes meant questions, questions meant trouble, and trouble in her case always came from the same place, the rival pack across the river. Mara kept her sleeves long even in summer. She learned how to flinch without making it obvious, how to swallow pain without sound, how to clean blood out of linen before anyone could smell it. What she didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that the Alpha King had started watching her. It happened on a morning that should have been ordinary, the kind of morning where the estate smelled of fresh bread and polished stone, where sunlight crept through tall windows and settled across the marble floors. The kind of morning Mara loved because routine meant safety. She was kneeling near the east corridor, scrubbing mud from the hem of a rug when the temperature of the room shifted. Not metaphorically, literally. The air thickened. Conversations down the hall faltered. Footsteps slowed, then stopped entirely. Mara didn't look up. You didn't look up when power entered a room unless invited. Everyone knew that, but she felt him anyway. Alpha King Rovan Hale had arrived unannounced. He didn't bring guards when he wanted honesty. That alone should have terrified the household more than any armed escort. The servants froze. The stewards bowed too quickly. Somewhere behind her, a tray clattered to the floor. Rovan's presence was heavy, not loud, not theatrical, just unavoidable, like a storm you sensed before the sky darkened. "Who assigned the East Wing today?" he asked. His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. Mara's stomach tightened. She kept her eyes on the floor, scrubbing harder. A steward cleared his throat. "That would be Mara, Your Majesty." Silence. Mara felt it land on her like a hand between her shoulders. "Stand," the king said, her muscles locked for half a second too long. Then she rose, careful, controlled, hands folded in front of her the way she'd been taught. She still didn't look at him. "You're shaking," Rovan said. "I'm cold, sir." It was a lie, not a good one, but it was the only one she had. "Look at me." The command wasn't sharp. That was worse. It slid under her skin, bypassed fear, and settled somewhere deeper, somewhere instinctive. Mara lifted her gaze. Alpha King Rovan Hale was taller than most men she'd known, broad-shouldered in a way that didn't look cultivated. His dark hair was threaded with silver at the temples, his expression unreadable. His eyes, steel gray, assessing, moved over her face with unsettling precision. Then his gaze dropped to her wrists. Mara reacted too late. The sleeve had slipped while she scrubbed. Just enough, just a glimpse, yellowing bruises, finger-shaped, some older, fading, some newer, livid, beneath pale skin. The room seemed to hold its breath. Rovan didn't reach for her. He didn't speak right away. He just looked. "How long?" he asked quietly. "Have you been injured?" Mara's heart hammered. It's nothing, Your Majesty. I'm clumsy." A lie, a practiced one that had worked 100 times before. It didn't work now. Rovan stepped closer, not into her space, just close enough that she could smell rain and iron, the faint scent of pine that clung to him. "These marks," he said, voice low, controlled, "weren't made by falling." Mara's throat closed. Around them, no one moved. The servants stared at the floor. The stewards suddenly found great interest in the walls. The Alpha King was not known for kindness. He was known for order, for consequences. Mara forced herself to breathe. "Please, sir, I don't want trouble." Something flickered in his eyes at that, not anger, recognition. "Who did this?" he asked. She shook her head immediately, too quickly. "No one." Rovan straightened slowly. "Leave us," he said to the room. No one hesitated. Within seconds, the corridor emptied, doors closing softly until only the two of them remained, sunlight stretching long across the stone. Mara's knees threatened to give out. "You don't belong to this pack," Rovan said. It wasn't a question. Her chest tightened. "I work here." "That's not what I said," she swallowed. "I was loaned as part of a treaty." Rovan's jaw set. The treaty, of course. The Hollow Creek Pack had offered labor instead of land after losing a border dispute years ago, disposable people instead of territory. It had been signed before Rovan's reign, before he'd consolidated power. "And they still claim you," he said. Mara nodded once. "Do they summon you back?" he asked. She hesitated. Rovan waited. "Yes." "How often?" Her voice dropped to barely more than a breath. "Whenever they want to remind me." The silence that followed was dangerous. Rovan turned toward the window, staring out over the grounds. When he spoke again, his voice was even, but something dark threaded beneath it. "They have no authority to harm someone under my roof." Mara hugged her arms closer to her body. "They don't do it here." Rovan looked back at her sharply. Where? Her lips parted, closed again. If she answered, things would change, and change was never gentle. "They meet me at the river road," she whispered. "Said if I told anyone, they'd send my younger brother back instead." Rovan's expression hardened into something lethal. "You're bleeding," he said. Mara followed his gaze. A thin line of red had surfaced where one bruise had split open beneath the strain of her grip. She hadn't even felt it. Rovan removed his coat without a word and draped it over her shoulders. The weight of it nearly broke her. "No one touches you again," he said. It wasn't a promise, it was a sentence. Mara didn't know it yet, but the moment the Alpha King noticed her bruises, the balance between packs had already begun to collapse. Rovan Hale did not walk Mara back through the corridors. He placed her at his side and let the entire estate see it. That alone sent a ripple through the household more violent than any shouted order. Servants paused mid-step. Stewards stiffened. A few guards straightened, eyes flicking from the Alpha King to the quiet maid wrapped in his coat like they were trying to reconcile two realities that should not exist together. Mara kept her head down, heart pounding so hard she felt it in her throat. She had never walked these halls without being invisible, never with power beside her instead of looming over her. Every step felt wrong, dangerous. When they reached the private sitting room near the council wing, Rovan opened the door himself and gestured her inside. It wasn't lavish. He didn't favor excess, but it was warm, fire crackling low, leather chairs worn from use rather than display. "Sit," he said. Mara hesitated. "Please," he added softer. That was worse. She perched on the edge of the chair, hands clasped tight in her lap. The coat slid open slightly, exposing more bruises along her forearms. Rovan noticed. Of course he did. He crouched in front of her, slow, deliberate, so she wouldn't flinch. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her wrist. No one had asked her permission for anything in years. She nodded. His fingers were warm, careful. He didn't press, didn't turn her skin as if inspecting livestock. He simply looked, his thumb hovering close enough that she could feel the heat without the touch. "These aren't from a single incident," he said. "No," she whispered. "How long?" She stared at the fire. "Since I was 16. Rovan exhaled slowly through his nose. "And your brother? He's 12, Mara said. "Still lives in Hollow Creek." Rovan straightened. "They use him to keep you compliant." "Yes. Have they harmed him?" "Not yet." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Rovan stood and crossed to the sideboard, pouring water into a glass instead of the whiskey most expected of him. He handed it to her. "Drink." Her hands shook as she did. "You understand," he said, "that what you've described is a violation of interpack law." Mara let out a humorless breath. "They don't care about law." "They will," Rovan replied. She looked up at him then, really looked. There was no bluster in his expression, no performative anger, just a cold, settled certainty that frightened her more than shouting ever could. "I don't want war," she said quickly. "Please, I just want them to stop." Rovan's gaze softened, just a fraction. "You don't start a fire by naming the flame," he said. "You start it by striking the match." She didn't understand, not yet. He had her moved that night, not to the servants' wing, but to a small room near the inner courtyard, close to guard rotation. It was framed as temporary, a precaution, quiet, no announcement. But people noticed anyway. They always did. By morning, whispers followed her like smoke. "Why is the king protecting a maid? Did you see the coat? Maybe she's a spy? Maybe she's his—" No one finished that sentence out loud. Mara kept working. She always did. Scrubbed floors, folded linens, avoided eye contact. But something had shifted. Guards acknowledged her now. Stewards hesitated before snapping orders. The air around her felt alert, and Hollow Creek noticed too. The summons came 2 days later, a folded note tucked into her wash basket, sealed with a familiar crest that made her stomach drop. River Road, sunset, alone. Her hands went numb. She considered burning it. She considered pretending she never saw it, but they would know. They always did. At dusk, she told no one where she was going. That was her mistake. The River Road smelled of wet stone and decay, twilight settling thick between the trees. Mara walked with her sleeves down, heart in her ears, every step rehearsed. 3 figures stepped out of the brush before she reached the bend. One she recognized immediately. Cade Moran, Hollow Creek's enforcer. Broad, scarred, smiling like this was his favorite kind of evening. "You're late," he said. "I came as soon as I could," Mara replied, voice steady by force alone. His eyes dropped to her wrists, then to the faint impression of fabric that suggested healing underneath. "Looks like you've been pampered," he said. "New digs?" She said nothing. He backhanded her, not hard enough to knock her down, hard enough to remind her. "We heard the king's been sniffing around," Cade continued, circling her. "You forget your place?" "No," she whispered. "Good. Because you belong to us." His grip closed around her arm, fingers digging into healing flesh. Pain flared bright, sharp. "Touch her again," a voice said from the road, "and you'll lose the hand." Cade froze. Mara's breath caught. Rovan Hale stood a few paces away, cloak dark against the dying light. He wasn't alone. 2 guards flanked him, silent, alert. Cade recovered quickly, too quickly. "Alpha King," he said, mockingly respectful. "Didn't expect to see you slumming it." Roven's gaze never left Cade's hand on Mara's arm. "Release her," he said. Cade tightened his grip. "She's Hollow Creek property," he replied. "Loaned, not freed." Roven moved then. Not fast, not slow, just enough. Cade's hand dropped away as if burned. Roven stepped between them, placing himself squarely in front of Mara. She felt the solid wall of him at her back, felt her knees weaken with the relief of it. "She is under my protection," Roven said. "Your claim is void." Cade laughed. "You think a maid is worth the trouble?" Roven leaned in, voice low. "I think she's worth burning your pack to the ground." The guards shifted. Cade's smile faltered, just a little. "This isn't over," he said, backing away. "You'll regret meddling." Roven didn't answer. He waited until they were gone before turning to Mara. Her hands were shaking violently now, adrenaline crashing, fear catching up. "You followed me," she said. "I had you watched," he corrected, "because I suspected they wouldn't stop." Tears blurred her vision. "They won't. Not unless—" "They will," Roven said firmly, "because now it's no longer quiet." He guided her back to the estate himself this time, his hand steady at her elbow. She didn't pull away. That night, messengers rode. By dawn, the council was convened, and by noon, the rival pack understood something they should have realized years ago. Hurting a maid was one thing. Hurting someone the Alpha King had claimed responsibility for was another entirely. The council chamber was built to intimidate. High ceilings, dark stone, long tables scarred by generations of arguments that had ended in blood or treaties that barely held. Mara had never been inside it before. Servants didn't belong here. Maids certainly didn't. Yet there she was, seated along the far wall, hands folded in her lap, Roven Hale standing at the head of the table, as if the room itself bent toward him. The Hollow Creek delegation arrived late. That was deliberate. 3 alphas, a beta, and Cade Moran at the rear like a shadow that refused to leave. Their scents hit the room before their boots did. Sharp, aggressive, meant to provoke. Roven didn't rise. "Sit," he said. They did, slowly, with eyes that flicked, measuring. Mara kept her gaze on the floor, heart racing. Every instinct screamed that this was too much attention, too much exposure. She had survived by staying small. This was standing in the open. Alpha Bren Holloway cleared his throat. "We were surprised by your summons, King Hale." "You shouldn't have been," Roven replied. "Not after last night." Bren's eyes slid to Mara, cold, assessing. "Ah," Bren said. "The maid." Roven's hand flattened on the table. "The woman," he corrected, voice sharpening. "Whom you have been assaulting." Bren scoffed. "We discipline our own." "She is not your own." Murmurs rippled around the table. A few council members shifted, alert now. Bren leaned back. "She was given to your pack under treaty." "Labor," Roven said. "Not ownership, and certainly not permission to maim." Cade stepped forward. "She came willingly." Mara flinched despite herself. Roven's head turned slowly toward Cade. "You will not speak again," he said calmly, "unless invited." The silence that followed was absolute. Roven gestured, and one of the guards produced a folded cloth, setting it gently on the table before him. "Unwrap it," Roven said. Mara's stomach twisted. She knew what it was before she saw it. The cloth fell away to reveal a stack of notes, dates, times, injuries recorded in a careful, steady hand. Mara's hand. She hadn't meant for anyone to see it. She'd written them down late at night, more habit than hope. Proof for a future she didn't believe she'd reach. Roven tapped the top page. "Patterns," he said. "Consistent timing, consistent locations, consistent perpetrators." Bren's jaw tightened. "You have 2 choices," Roven continued. "You can acknowledge this abuse and submit to sanctions, or you can deny it, and I will open your pack to investigation." Bren laughed, sharp and humorless. "You'd risk destabilizing the river territories over a servant?" Roven's gaze flicked to Mara, just for a moment, then back to Bren. "Yes." That was when the room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but every alpha present felt it. The subtle recalibration of power. The realization that this wasn't about a maid anymore. It was about precedent, about what Roven Hale would tolerate. Bren exhaled through his teeth. "What sanctions?" Roven didn't hesitate. "You will relinquish all claims over Mara Vale, effective immediately." Mara's breath hitched. "You will provide restitution," Roven continued, "to her and to her brother." Bren stiffened. "The boy stays with us. He leaves today," Roven said, "under my protection." "And if we refuse?" Roven leaned forward, eyes steel hard. "Then I will dismantle your pack piece by piece, under the weight of your own violations." The council held its breath. Bren's shoulders sagged, just slightly. "Enough. Fine," he said. "Take her. Take the boy. This isn't worth a war." Roven nodded once. The meeting ended quickly after that. Papers signed, seals broken, new ones pressed. By sunset, Hollow Creek no longer owned anything that belonged to Mara. She didn't feel victorious. She felt hollow. Rovan found her in the courtyard that evening, sitting on the low stone wall near the fountain, watching the water ripple in the fading light. "It's done," he said. She nodded. "They'll hate me," she whispered. "They already did," he replied. "Now they'll fear consequence." She wrapped her arms around herself. "My brother?" "On his way," Rovan said. "Escorted. He'll be here by morning." Her breath shuddered out of her, relief so sharp it hurt. "Thank you," she said. Rovan studied her for a long moment. "This changes things for you." "Yes," she said quietly. "That's what scares me." Change arrived sooner than she expected. That night, Hollow Creek burned one of their own bridges. Literally, a border watchtower went up in flames. No casualties, just a message. By dawn, rumors were moving faster than messengers. Retaliation, escalation, provocation. Rovan didn't react publicly. Privately, he doubled guard rotations. He kept Mara close, not hidden, but protected. Her duties shifted subtly. Less exposure, more eyes. Some resented it. Others watched her with something like awe. When her brother arrived, thin, wide-eyed, clutching a threadbare pack, Mara broke for the first time in years. She held him like she was afraid he'd vanish if she let go. Rovan stood back, allowing the moment. That night, Mara couldn't sleep. Too much had happened. Too much was still moving. She slipped out into the quiet corridors, drawn by restlessness she couldn't name. She found Rovan in the war room, maps spread before him, candles burning low. He didn't look surprised to see her. "You should be resting," he said. "So should you," she replied. A corner of his mouth twitched. She stepped closer, gaze drawn to the maps. "Is there going to be war?" "Not if I can help it." "And if you can't?" Rovan looked at her then, really looked. "Then they will learn," he said softly. "What happens when cruelty stops being quiet?" Mara swallowed. "I never wanted this," she said. "I just wanted it to stop." Rovan reached out, hesitated, then placed a steadying hand over hers on the table. "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." Outside, thunder rolled low on the horizon, and for the first time, Mara understood something she hadn't before. The bruises had been the beginning. The reckoning was still coming. The storm didn't break that night. It hovered instead, thick clouds rolling low over the estate, thunder muttering in the distance like a warning that refused to fade. Guards reported unusual movement along the river border, fires where there shouldn't have been fires, scouts returning with unease etched into their faces. Hollow Creek wasn't done. Mara felt it before anyone told her. Pain had taught her how to read silence, the kind that pressed against the skin, that made every small sound feel too loud. She stayed close to her brother, helped him settle into the small guest room Rovan had arranged, sat beside him until his breathing evened out. Only then did she allow herself to shake. She wrapped her arms around her knees, staring at the wall, the memory of Cade's grip still ghosting her skin. Even with protection, especially with it, fear didn't disappear. It simply changed shape. A knock came, soft. "Mara," Rovan said from the other side of the door. She rose and opened it. He looked tired, not the visible kind, the deeper sort that settled behind the eyes of someone carrying responsibility that never slept. "They're moving," he said quietly. "Not openly. Testing." She nodded. "They always do that first." Rovan studied her. "You know their patterns." "Yes." "How?" She hesitated, then spoke because there was no reason not to anymore. "They like to see how much someone could endure before breaking. They never rushed." Rovan's jaw tightened. "I won't let them near you again," he said. She believed him. That was the frightening part. The first attempt came 2 nights later. A servant found a knife embedded in the outer gate at dawn, a strip of cloth tied to the hilt. It was Hollow Creek's colors, a challenge. Rovan responded by doing nothing. That unsettled everyone more than retaliation would have. The second attempt was quieter. A guard patrol vanished near the old mill road. They were found hours later, alive, shaken, carrying a message carved into the dirt. "Send her back." This time the council demanded action. Rovan listened. He always did. Then he dismissed them. "They want her to be afraid," he said afterward, standing with Mara on the balcony overlooking the courtyard. "They want her to think this ends only if she disappears." Mara's fingers curled around the stone railing. "They'll keep escalating." "Yes, then why wait?" Rovan looked at her. "Because if I strike too soon, they become martyrs. If I strike at the right moment, they become an example." She exhaled slowly. "You're using me as bait." Rovan didn't deny it. "I'm using what they think they know," he corrected. "They believe you're still powerless, that you still belong to them. And when they realize I don't?" Rovan's gaze softened, just slightly. "Then they won't be able to stop what comes next." The moment came at dawn on the 5th day. A rider breached the outer perimeter, reckless with desperation. He was intercepted before he reached the gates, thrown from his horse and dragged before Rovan. Mara watched from the steps, her brother clinging to her side. The rider was bleeding, panicked. "They're coming," he gasped. "Hollow Creek, full force. They crossed the river at night." The courtyard erupted. Guards moved. Commands snapped. Steel rang as weapons were drawn. Rovan didn't raise his voice. "Lock down the inner ring," he ordered. "Evacuate non-combatants." His gaze found Mara immediately. "Stay with your brother," he said. "Do not leave the inner keep." She nodded. But fate didn't care about plans. The breach didn't come through the gates. It came through the servants' tunnels. Mara smelled smoke before she heard shouting. By the time she reached the corridor, chaos was already spilling inward. Guards fighting in close quarters, shadows lunging, steel flashing. "Stay back!" someone yelled. Mara shoved her brother behind her instinctively, and then she saw him. Cade Moran burst through the smoke, blood on his jaw, eyes wild with triumph. "There you are," he snarled. "Thought you could hide behind a king?" Mara's heart slammed. A guard lunged for Cade. Cade cut him down without slowing. Mara's brother cried out. Something in her snapped. Not loudly, not cleanly, just finally. She didn't scream. She stepped forward. "Leave him alone," she said, her voice steady in a way that surprised even her. Cade laughed. "Or what? You'll cry at me?" He reached for her, didn't make it. Rovan hit him from the side like a force of nature. The fight was brutal, fast. Rovan moved with precision, born of years of command and violence he never spoke of. Cade fought dirty, desperate. Mara watched it unfold as if time had slowed, every breath sharp in her chest. Cade went down hard. Rovan stood over him, chest heaving, blade pressed to his throat. "End it," Cade spat. "You think this makes her yours?" Rovan didn't answer. He looked at Mara instead, not for permission, for acknowledgement. Mara met his gaze. She thought of the bruises, the silence, the nights she'd swallowed pain so others could sleep. She nodded once. Rovan ended it swiftly. The rest of Hollow Creek's force broke within the hour. By sunset, the river ran quiet again. The aftermath was strangely still. Bodies removed, fires extinguished, the estate standing, scarred but intact. Mara sat on the steps long after it was over, hands shaking now that the danger had passed. Rovan approached slowly, blood washed from his hands, exhaustion finally visible. "It's over," he said. She looked up at him. "No," she replied softly. "It's finished." He studied her, seeing something new in her expression. Not fear, resolve. "You're not invisible anymore," he said. Mara rose to her feet. "I never was," she said. "I was just quiet." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain at last. The rain came after midnight. Not a storm this time, just a steady, cleansing fall that soaked the stone and washed the last traces of smoke from the air. By morning, the estate looked almost peaceful again, as if violence had never touched it. But Mara knew better. Peace wasn't the absence of noise. It was the absence of fear, and fear had shaped her life for so long that its silence felt strange, almost unsettling. She stood at the window of her new room, not the servants' quarters, not the attic, but a modest chamber near the inner courtyard. She hadn't asked for it. Rovan hadn't announced it. It had simply happened, like so many things since the bruises were noticed. Below, the courtyard stirred awake. Guards changed shifts. Messengers rode out. The world moved on, indifferent to how close it had come to breaking her. A knock sounded. "Mara," her brother's voice whispered. She opened the door immediately. He looked stronger already, still thin, still wary, but there was light in his eyes she hadn't seen since they were children, before Hollow Creek learned her name. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. He shook his head. "I keep waiting to hear them." "They're gone," she said gently. "They won't come back?" "How do you know?" She hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because they lost." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded, as if committing it to memory. They ate breakfast together in a quiet corner of the hall. No one stared now. No one whispered. Some nodded in respect. Others looked at her with something like caution. She didn't mind either. Mid-morning, a summons arrived. Not from the council, from Rovan. She found him where she'd first realized everything had changed. The east corridor, sunlight slanting across polished stone. "You're leaving?" he said. Her stomach dropped. "I am. For the day," he clarified. "With an escort." She frowned. "Why?" "To see something," he said, "and to decide something." They rode out just past noon, past the river road that had once felt like a sentence, and now felt small. Beyond it lay land that hadn't been touched by Hollow Creek in generations. Old stone foundations, overgrown fields. "This used to be a settlement," Rovan said, "before border wars, before packs learned to trade people instead of territory." Mara dismounted slowly, looking around. "What does this have to do with me?" Rovan faced her fully then. "You survived something most don't," he said. "Not because you were protected, but because you learned how to endure." She swallowed. "I don't want pity." "This isn't pity," he replied. "It's recognition." He gestured to the land. "I'm offering this to you. Stewardship, protection, autonomy." Her breath caught. "You're giving me land?" "I'm giving you choice," Rovan corrected. "You can stay at the estate. You can leave. You can build something that belongs to you." She stared at him, overwhelmed. "And my brother? He goes where you go." Silence stretched between them, filled only by wind through tall grass. "I don't know how to be anything other than what I was," Mara admitted quietly. Rovan stepped closer, but didn't crowd her. "You already are," he said. "You just haven't named it yet." She looked at the horizon, at possibilities she'd never allowed herself to imagine. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Rovan didn't answer immediately. "When I noticed your bruises," he said finally, "I saw cruelty hiding in plain sight, and I realized how many times I'd walked past it without knowing." She turned back to him. "I won't do that again," he continued. "Not with you. Not with anyone." Mara exhaled slowly. "I don't want to be protected forever," she said. Rovan nodded. "Then don't be." They returned at dusk. Life didn't transform overnight, but it shifted, steadily. Mara began overseeing repairs in the outer villages. She learned logistics, trade. People listened when she spoke, not because of fear, but because she understood what it meant to be unheard. Her brother laughed more. Rovan watched her change without interference. One evening, weeks later, she found him on the balcony, the same place where she'd once admitted her fear. "You're leaving tomorrow," he said. "Yes. For good." She shook her head. "For now," he smiled faintly. "Good." She studied him. "You knew I would." "Yes. Does that bother you?" "No," he said. "It reassures me." She stepped closer, the space between them no longer charged with imbalance. "You didn't save me," she said. Rovan met her gaze. "No. You noticed me." "Yes." That was enough. They stood there as night settled, the estate quiet, the future unwritten, far from the river road, far from the bruises. Mara Vale was no longer a maid no one noticed. She was a woman who had been seen, and nothing would ever make her invisible again. The first winter after Hollow Creek fell was the quietest Mara could remember, not because the world softened, if anything it grew sharper, but because fear no longer lived under her skin. It no longer dictated how she breathed, where she walked, how much space she was allowed to take. Snow settled over the land she'd been given like a promise kept. The settlement took shape slowly, not grand, not symbolic. Practical buildings, strong roofs, roads wide enough for wagons and people who didn't want to shrink themselves. Mara insisted on that. No narrow passages, no corners designed to trap. People came quietly at first. An Omega widow whose pack had dissolved after a failed alliance. A young man cast out for refusing a forced bond. Families who had learned the hard way that protection written on paper meant nothing without accountability behind it. Mara welcomed them all the same way, with rules. No one owned anyone here. No debts paid in bodies. No punishment disguised as tradition. Disputes were spoken aloud, witnessed, resolved without fists in the dark. Some thought it would fail. They said kindness without fear bred chaos. They were wrong. By spring, the settlement had a name people used without irony. A place spoken of in low voices. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was different. And difference unsettled the old order more than violence ever had. Rovan visited without announcement. He always did. Sometimes with guards. Sometimes alone. Sometimes just to walk the perimeter, hands clasped behind his back, listening more than speaking. They talked about logistics, about borders, about how change once started never stayed contained. They never talked about the night Hollow Creek burned. They didn't need to. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields amber, Rovan stood beside Mara near the outer fence. "You've altered the balance," he said. "So have you," she replied. He glanced at her. "You think I haven't noticed?" She smiled faintly. "I hoped you had." There was no tension between them now, no hierarchy pressing down on the moment, just two people standing in the aftermath of a decision neither of them could take back. "You could formalize this," Rovan said. "Council recognition, permanent charter." Mara considered it. "Eventually, not yet." "Why?" "Because if this only survives with a king's seal, then it doesn't belong to the people who live here." Rovan nodded once. "Fair." They watched the settlement lights come on one by one, as dusk deepened. "Do you ever regret noticing?" Mara asked quietly. Rovan didn't answer right away. "I regret not noticing sooner," he said finally. That night, Mara walked the paths alone, listening to the sounds of ordinary life. Laughter, argument, the clatter of tools being put away. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just real. She stopped at the edge of the land, where the trees thickened and the river curved away into shadow. Once, that road had been a sentence, a place where she learned how pain could be systematic, deliberate, routine. Now it was just a road. She flexed her hands, unmarked at last. Far away, in territories that once traded silence for stability, stories were changing. Not loudly, not cleanly, but steadily. They spoke of an alpha king who had rewritten treaties instead of enforcing them, of a former maid who governed without spectacle, of a place where bruises were not ignored and cruelty no longer hid behind tradition. Some packs scoffed, others paid attention, and a few, just enough to matter, began to ask uncomfortable questions about who they protected and why. Mara returned home as the moon rose, unafraid of being seen, unafraid of being followed, unafraid of being quiet, because silence, she had learned, was only dangerous when it was forced, and hers never would be again.